So this switch requires all of that. Let's get into it. So this is for the Microswitch on the clutch, and if you track the cable around, it ends up being right here. All right, so I ran the new connector right through the bottom here. It's really hard to see, but I mean, if you've gotten this far and you've unplugged the old one, which again was plugged in right here, and you just pulled it through, you'll know exactly where this one needs to come through. But essentially right up here, and again, at least mine was like all wrapped around all this stuff, I guess to like, shorten the cable, but it made it super confusing, and that's why I didn't really know where it was plugged into. But it is just that connector right back there. That's where the clutch Microswitch cable plugs into, and that little tab goes through that open part right there. We're gonna go ahead and plug it all in and then clean up some of this wiring and start putting this thing back together. All right, so sensor is mounted up on the clutch lever, and I realize you can actually pull this out, which makes plugging it in a lot easier, but we're plugged in there. So we're gonna go ahead and get the windscreen mount and the dash, whatever you wanna call it, back up on here. It's just these 4 bolts. I'm gonna get the harness plugged in first, and then put the bolts in for the dash and the windscreen mount. All right, so that's all wired in, and you'll see there's a little tab. So what I did is I used a flathead when I was removing this, and I just went in, I pushed the tab, and then the wiring harness came right out, because otherwise this harness is so short that you really don't have that much movement with this mount. So with that removed, we got 4 bolts here, and then the other ones you access through the top here, and we'll be able to mount this back up and put the windscreen on, then start working on the fairings. All right, now we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we can go ahead and put this trim piece back on, and it just kind of, I'm one-handed, but it just flexes out and around and goes right here and covers up these bolts, and then screws in right there. All right, next we can go ahead and put this trim piece on, which will help hold the fairing in. So it just snaps into that back piece, and then it'll just not dangle, but it'll just sit there until we're able to bolt these screws into the front fairing when we lift it up. Actually, I lied. If you bolt through this bolt right here, it will actually bolt in right here, and then it'll keep this piece on. This on I believe pre-2021 update, this used to bolt into the mirrors, but now the mirrors are separate entities, so this just has a nut on the back. So it's like a really pointless bolt, but I think they're just reusing the fairing piece. And then same on the other side. All right, now we can put the front fairing back on. So you'll see that these 2 bolt holes are where the mirrors bolt in. I have the mirror delete, so either way you'll have 2 bolts that go right there, and then you have 1, 2 bolts, actually 1, 2, 3, you have one on the front, and then you have that tab right here which just snaps in. So you just snap in the front first, and then you'll be able to bolt everything else back up. Here's where that last bolt goes. It's not a normal looking fairing bolt, it's pretty long, but that's the third. So you got 1, 2, 3, plus the 2 for the mirrors, and those are the 5 on each side, plus a little push pin in the middle that will get this fairing back on. All right, finally, before we put the trim piece back on, just went around with all these cable ties and put everything back together. I'm gonna do one more here. And then there are a couple underneath that I ended up not putting back on because everything was so cinched up, it didn't feel necessary. And also it would have been an absolute pain to get it back wrapped around. So I left them off. I guess I probably left 2 off because I'm gonna end up using this one. But I did 1, 2, 3, and then I'll have one more down here. And then that should be a good day. I had removed this originally when I was just kind of digging around, taking random stuff off. You don't have to. It's for the main wire and harness loom that you don't need to touch. So don't worry about taking that off. All right, and then finally we're putting these panels on. So it's just one bolt here, one here, and you just slide it forward into the clip. So very easy to put on. I'll just put on both sides real quick. Windscreen, very self-explanatory. Those 3 bolts, I'm not gonna tell you how to do that. All right, so the bike is back together. All the fairings are put back on. I mean, moment of truth. We're gonna see. I will say I should have disconnected the battery prior to undoing the wiring harness for the dash, but lesson learned, I would say you guys should do that. And then obviously just follow this whole video in reverse for taking it apart, and should be pretty straightforward now that you know what you need to take off. And it's really not that hard once you know. I would say it would take 15 minutes of fairing removal and then just routing that new sensor in, which I'll link the part number in the description for what the sensor is that you need to replace if you do break your micro switch. I'll say that mine looked perfectly intact. I just remember feeling the crunch when I tried to use Amazon levers, and then my quick shifter stopped working. So although it looks perfectly fine, it could still be broken. But moment of truth, we're gonna start this up, see if we get any codes, and then take it for a ride and see if the quick shifter works. All right, just to wrap things up, I went for a ride, turned on the bike, everything worked fine. No error codes from unplugging anything. Quick shifting worked, so the sensor was the issue. But just to show you, I mean, like, my sensor looks perfectly fine. So if I hadn't have felt that crunch when I was installing those cheap levers, I mean, I would have ended up replacing this just to see if that was the issue. But like visually, it looks fine. It's crazy. So yeah, $100 sensor, and you know, call it 15 minutes to get all the fairings off, and another 15 to put it all back together. Not too bad of a job. Moral of the story is buy good levers, and you won't have to worry about doing this, hopefully. Check out my video though on the cheap levers I found that are replicas of the stock levers from Ducati, and they're $30 for the set. I mean, you really can't beat it if you don't want to drop $150, $200 on aftermarket levers, but you need a replacement lever for some reason. It's the way to go. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.